The Pittsburgh Steelers are by far the weirdest team in the entire NFL. Despite the fact they have a net point differential of -26, and despite having a bottom 5 offense in the entire NFL, they sit at 6-3 and sit firmly in the AFC wildcard race. But how are they managing to win? And should other teams potentially take note of how the Steelers team is winning games? Well, we're going to answer those questions plus some more in this video. I want to get this out of the way. I am no expert on the Pittsburgh Steelers. I actually don't really watch too much Pittsburgh Steelers football, but when I do get the chance, I do like to look at some different statistics as well as a little bit of film on Kenny Pickett and this offense. And through my basic research, I'm going to give you guys everything I can tell you guys about this Pittsburgh Steelers offense and defense. And at the very end, I'll let you guys know if I think this team has a legitimate chance to win the Super Bowl. So let's start this off by actually going into these basic statistics that I think generally give you a good idea of how this team is winning games. For starters, this offense has been abysmal, as I mentioned earlier. Now we're going to add some context a little bit later about how this team is able to put up points, but for now, here's the raw stats. They average 17.3 points per game, which is 26th lowest in the entire NFL. They also rank 28th in yards per game, 26th in points per play, and 27th in touchdowns per game, whereas on defense, it is a lot more of a clearer story. Despite the fact this Pittsburgh Steelers defense gives up 380 yards per game, but despite that, they only give up 20.2 points per game, which is the 11th best in the NFL, 1.9 touchdowns per game, which is the 6th best in the NFL, and when teams get into the red zone, they have a 40.74% chance of making it inside the end zone, which is the 4th best in the entire NFL. So that right there kind of summarizes a lot of information. This offense is bad, but this defense is good enough to win them games. Defensively, they have a bend but don't break type of system. They will gladly let you drive the ball down the field every single drive, but in order to score touchdowns, you have to be perfect all game long, because this defense has a tenacity that is really unique in comparison to other defenses. When we think of the prototypical defenses, oftentimes you'll talk about teams like the Dallas Cowboys, the San Francisco 49ers, the Baltimore Ravens, teams like that. But the Steelers take, like I mentioned earlier, a weird approach to that, because they have the 13th best sack ratio, the 8th best interception thrown ratio, and this defense has a turnover margin of +10. So this defense gets sacks, they get turnovers, and ultimately they lock down when they need to lock down inside the red zone. This is a Steelers defense that has managed to have some really good games, especially against teams like the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Green Bay Packers, and the Tennessee Titans. Now let's go ahead and pivot onto the offensive side of things. As I mentioned earlier, this offense generally has been horrible, but it is something about that fourth quarter that Kenny Pickett just loves to turn up in. Kenny Pickett is arguably the worst quarterback in the entire NFL through the first 3 quarters, but as it enters into the fourth quarter, for some reason he just knows how to turn it around. His passer rating between the first 3 quarters is at a 76.2, which is the 6th worst in the entire NFL, but when it gets to the fourth quarter, he has a passer rating of 101.5, which is the 6th best in the entire NFL. And that same concept applies to his completion percentage, which jumps from 59.3% in the first 3 quarters to 69.4%, which is the 6th best also in the entire NFL. And despite the fact this team has a negative point differential for their entire season, in the fourth quarter they actually have the 7th best point differential with a +14 in the fourth quarter. So Kenny Pickett, despite the fact he is sucking in the first half of games, is extremely clutch. And for this team to win games, the recipe is to just survive the first 3 quarters. Defensively, don't let this team get blown out, and offensively, just do enough to survive. And when you get into that fourth quarter, let Kenny Pickett work his magic to try to win the game. Now, it definitely does take a combined effort from both the offense and defense, but it also takes a combined effort from a lot of these Pittsburgh Steelers superstars. The biggest superstar on this team, TJ Watt, is having a hell of a year. On the year, he has 30 combined tackles, 8 assisted tackles, 10.5 sacks, 1 interception, and multiple fumbles, and he is on pace to have a really good shot at the Defensive Player of the Year award. Another superstar player on this defense, Alex Highsmith, is also having a great season. Through 9 games, he has 4.5 sacks, 18 solo tackles, 14 assisted tackles, as well as an interception. And of course, a defense is only as good as its secondary, as Minkah Fitzpatrick is also having a very solid season. By no means do I think Minkah Fitzpatrick is having his best season of his career, as he currently does not have a single interception on the year, but he does have 43 solo tackles to go along with only 23 targets with only 15 receptions allowed. I will firmly admit that this has not been his best season, but this defense overall as a whole has gotten a lot more talented, with guys like Joey Porter Jr. having a great rookie season. So all he has to do is just continue to just do his job, and I think that's exactly what he's doing. Now as we go to the offensive side of things, there's also been a ton of improvements on that side as well. George Pickens is becoming a really good #1 receiver, as on the year he has 33 receptions for 566 yards and 3 touchdowns. And when they can't pass the ball, they can continue to rely on this run game, as it has been arguably one of the better units in the entire NFL. Najee Harris currently has 464 yards on 116 carries to go along with 3 touchdowns. They also have a very nice 1-2 combination of Jaylen Warren as well as Najee Harris. With Deontay Johnson coming back from an injury, I definitely do think this offense can take the next step to be at least decent. The offensive line has definitely been better this year, as they have a quarterback sack percentage of only 6.56%, which is a 17th best in the entire NFL. And lastly, to put a little bit of a cherry on top to how good this team is performing, they don't get penalties and they convert on field goals. I can't underestimate how important it is for your team to not be a super penalty prone team, as penalties obviously will just kill any drive you're having. And when your team has a chance to convert for 3 points, you have to make those kicks. obviously right now Chris Boswell is doing a hell of a job of doing that. All that right there is a small sample size as to why this team is winning games. They have a head coach who knows how to win games, and they have a quarterback who, when it matters the most, wins the games. But is this sustainable? Can this team continue to do this? Well, let's go ahead and look at the rest of their schedule, because I do think it is important to take that into context. The rest of their schedule goes like this: the Cleveland Browns, the Cincinnati Bengals, the Arizona Cardinals, the New England Patriots, the Indianapolis Colts, the Cincinnati Bengals, the Seattle Seahawks, and the Baltimore Ravens. In the Cleveland Browns game, they are going up against a really talented roster, but they are starting a rookie quarterback this week, so I think the Steelers can pull that win. Who knows with the Cincinnati Bengals what team we're going to get? I think the Steelers can definitely win that one as well. Arizona, New England, and Indianapolis are all very winnable matchups. And then after that, they have another matchup with the Cincinnati Bengals, and yet again, who knows what Cincinnati team we're going to get? I think more than likely it is very probable that these teams can split 1-1, so yet again, very winnable matchups. And then they end the season off with the Seattle Seahawks and the Baltimore Ravens. Very winnable matchups against the Seahawks and Ravens, but both those teams are extremely good. And what's very interesting is that Baltimore Ravens game could have huge implications for not only this division, but this whole conference. Obviously, as it sits right now, the Pittsburgh Steelers sit second in the division, and with the head-to-head matchup against them earlier in this year in which the Pittsburgh Steelers won, if they're somehow able to have a similar record or a better record, this game could be huge. And again, if somehow the Steelers team is able to win the division, that would have huge implications for not just that division, but the whole conference. So mark that Week 17 matchup against the Steelers and Ravens, as that could be a huge implication game for that AFC playoff race. So now it's time for me to give my own opinion. Thus far in this video, I've been restraining from giving you guys my opinion because I wanted to leave my ultimate bias out of this. You want to know the truth? I don't really believe in this Pittsburgh Steelers team. Now wait a minute, before you bash me, Pittsburgh Steelers fans, because I know you will, let me explain. My number one case is that you cannot continue to rely on fourth quarter comebacks. It has been proven time and time again that teams who typically struggle to blow out teams or have dominant wins and typically have really close matchups typically don't win Super Bowls. A great example of this was just last year with the Minnesota Vikings. I'm not saying the Steelers are the next Vikings, but that's kind of what I'm saying. And you can believe in fourth quarter Kenny, but me personally, I want to see 4 quarters Kenny, because this year he only has 1,600 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions, and the dude has played 9 games. And when you continuously rely on your defense to make plays over and over again and to create turnovers, when you go up against good teams, that's not going to be sustainable. And I know what Pittsburgh Steelers fans are saying. What do you mean? We've already beaten some good teams this year. And you're 100% correct. Going out there and beating that Ravens team 17-10 was extremely impressive. But we got to understand, divisional matchups are much more complicated than out-of-division matchups. Oftentimes we'll see teams like the Washington Commanders have super competitive games against the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys, but we know when it matters most, those Cowboys and Eagles teams would dominate that Commanders team, and that just might have been the case in that matchup. If you look at the rest of the season, when they've gone up against relatively good teams outside of the Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens, they lost to the 49ers, they lost to the Texans, and they lost to the Jaguars. And in those games, it wasn't very close. The 49ers beat them by 23, the Houston Texans beat them by 24, and the Jacksonville Jaguars beat you by 10. And when you exclude those Baltimore Ravens and Cleveland Browns games, they have victories over teams like the LA Rams, the Las Vegas Raiders, the Tennessee Titans, and the Green Bay Packers. And before you say, well, that Raiders team is looking really good now, that was with Josh McDaniels. It's not impressive. And all of those games were extremely close, where they could have potentially lost all those matchups. Now here's the good news for Steelers fans. Your rest of your schedule is pretty easy. They can easily beat this Browns team this week as they're starting Dorian Thompson-Robinson. I love Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals, but the Steelers can win that one. Same thing applies to the Patriots and the Colts. So if you win those 4 games, you're already sitting at 10 wins, and all you have to do is beat the Bengals once, the Seahawks, or the Ravens to potentially get up to 11 victories this year. And with 11 wins, you're probably making the wild card. Now when you do get to the wild card, and that's if you do, I don't think you're winning any games, because more than likely you will come in as either the 7th seed or the 6th seed or maybe the 5th seed, and as it currently sits, I don't think you're beating any of the conference champions in a wild card matchup. As much as I've given credit to some of the superstars in this team, it's not a complete unit for this team to win games. And you can only rely on fourth quarter Kenny so much, because the likelihood that a team is just going to play around with you the entire game up until that fourth quarter is extremely unlikely. Teams are going to score, and you have to respond, and if you can't respond, they're going to score again, and then next thing you know, you're getting blown out. And that's kind of what I predict happening to this Pittsburgh Steelers team. Now maybe Kenny Pickett has more magic in him than I'm giving him credit for, and if that happens and I'm wrong, I will be the first person to come out and admit that. At the end of the day, I stand by my word. I don't believe in this Steelers team. Sure, they can hit 11 wins, but when they get into the playoffs, will they have success? Fuck no. Do I think they're going to beat the Cincinnati Bengals or the Seattle Seahawks or the Baltimore Ravens? maybe once here or there. I just don't believe it. Now, what I will say is that if they have a favorable matchup in the playoffs, then who knows what might happen. If they somehow get in there as a 7th seed and have a matchup against the Baltimore Ravens in the first game, that would be a great spot for them. And then hypothetically, if they can have a rematch with the Jacksonville Jaguars somehow in the second round, great for them. They could potentially make a run for it. And if that does happen, I will sit here and make a video with my full face apologizing with tears down my eyes. But I have a strong feeling that is not going to happen. Steelers fans, I love you guys. I hope you guys don't bash me in the comments too much. I genuinely do hope this team can pull it together because I actually do like Kenny Pickett and George Pickens and a lot of these players on this roster. But you're 6-3 and you guys are acting like you're 9-0 and have a great chance to win the Super Bowl. That's just not the chance. I'll give you guys your flowers though. You are winning these matchups and this is the NFL where every single game matters, so good for you guys. But hope you guys did enjoy this video, and if you guys did, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. Steelers fans, take it easy on me in the comment section below, and make sure you hit the like and subscribe button if you do bash me in the comments below. But I love you guys. Peace.